Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice Radio. So today, we're going to be looking at Smeargle. You see, Smeargle cards, they tend to be pretty interesting. I was a big fan of the Smeargle from Breakthrough, which unfortunately saw very little play. But it had a nice ability, allowing you to switch a basic energy attached to one of your Pokemon with a basic energy in your discard pile. Although that card has now rotated out of the standard format, it lives on in spirit because Rainbow Paintbrush is totally a thing. Although Rainbow Brush it was actually translated as when it came out outside of Japan. So Smeargle lives on, and speaking of living on, this is kind of like a spiritual successor to the best Smeargle ever. Now, let's be clear, right? It's not Portrait Smeargle. Portrait Smeargle absolutely owned the Heart Gold Soul Silver format. You got to look at your opponent's hand and use a supporter card you found there. And games were lost because you would only find a Professor Juniper, and you would be forced to discard a hand and lose. That happened to me at Worlds, actually. That was a bit frustrating. Even though I didn't need to portrait, that lost me the game. Little bit upsetting. And games would be played where people would literally play random receiver so that they didn't have supporter cards in hand, so that they couldn't be copied with your opponent's Smeargle. Because people would use stuff like Switch and Sky Arrow Bridge to use multiple portrait every turn. Believe me when I say, Smeargle was absolutely central to the format. It changed how people played the game. It changed how people built their decks. This Smeargle is not that Smeargle, but I can absolutely see a use for it. So, it has got 80 HP, which is fine. I mean, expanded, level ball, etc. It's got a weakness to fighting, which I'm going to be honest with you is kind of annoying with Boswell running around. If they add a Diancie Prism Star, and they will be adding a Diancie Prism Star, they will be getting a one-hit KO. That's a little bit of a pain. Retreat cost of 1 means you do get free retreat with an escape board, which I expect to see a lot more play post-rotation. And being a colourless Pokemon means you're hitting nothing for weakness, and you don't really get any exclusive tricks. Boo, hiss, etc. But there is an attack here that I like very much indeed. According to the lovely David Hochmann, who of course has translated it from the official website in Japan, it allows you to look at your opponent's hand, and if you want, you can choose a supporter card you find there and use it as the effect of this attack. Now, one of the awkward things about the old Smeargle was that you had to choose a supporter card there. And the translation we have from David here says that you may choose a supporter card you find there. And it is a very important distinction. Okay, we've lost Professor Sycamore, which is always the worst one. I mean, finding a Professor Sycamore when you had 2 double colourless energy in hand was horrific. But then again, you still got cards in the format like Judge that you might not want to play. So there are supporter cards you'd really rather not use here. So if you've got a choice, that makes it much better. And essentially, this is the I don't have anything to do, I don't have an option, let's use Smeargle. Because an awful lot of people, by which I mean everyone, is playing for Cynthia nowadays. And we've all been in situations where we need a supporter card and we just don't have one. How often do both players not have a supporter? I mean, sure, it happens. It's happened many a time. But most of the time, if you don't have a supporter, your opponent will have a supporter, and that's essentially what you're relying on here. And then you can use their cards against them. Use their supporter cards against them. Maybe it's a Cynthia, maybe it's a copycat. It doesn't really matter what it is. I mean, maybe you hit a Judge, and actually it does more harm to your opponent than it does to you. And you might be thinking, well, hang on a second, Wassy. When would I ever actually use this? And the answer is you'd put 1 copy of Smeargle in your deck, so that if you found yourself without a supporter card turn 1, you could search it out using something like an Ultra Ball or a Nest Ball. Nest Ball is seeing a lot more play post-rotation. Hopefully get it in the active, maybe using something like an escape board, and then use this to get yourself a supporter card. And at this stage, many of you are probably thinking, well, hang on a second, Wassy, that's all well and good, but Tapu Lele's been released. If we want a supporter card on turn 1, we just use Tapu Lele. And look, Smeargle's not getting you a specific card, and Tapu Lele is. Tapu Lele, you can choose your supporter card. Smeargle, you might not find a supporter, though usually you will. And even if you do, you might not find a supporter card that you want. But here's the thing. Tapu Lele is an ability, so if there's an Alola Muck out, you ain't going to be able to use it. Although, to be fair, most of the time, if it's that early in the game, there won't be. But Tapu Lele is a GX. And honestly, most of the time, I'm not a huge fan of Smeargle here. But there is one card that makes me really, really like Smeargle. And it's Shrine of Punishment. You see, Shrine of Punishment is an amazing supporter card that is currently seeing a lot of play. It did at Worlds and it looks like it's carrying on. That puts 1 damage counter on each Pokemon GX and Pokemon EX between turns. And essentially any non-GX deck at the moment is taking advantage of this and using this to put a whole bunch more damage on the field. It's a very good card. It's seeing a lot of play. And then you end up in this silly position. I mean, look, I did a video just yesterday about Shining Lugia. Or maybe it was a couple days ago. I did one recently about Shining Lugia. And I said how you use Shrine of Punishment. And I said, look, you're playing Tapu Lele. Sometimes it's going to be on the field, and that sucks. Because then you're basically leaving a Pokemon on the field. And fine, it's probably not going to take 17 damage counters and be KO'd by Shrine of Punishment. But it's going to take some damage counters, and then your opponent can Guzma and KO it for 2 prizes. In a deck that uses Shrine of Punishment, you don't want Tapu Lele. If we look at the deck that a bunch of Australians use to get through Day 1 of Worlds, I'll pop a link to both these decks in the description, they basically use Baby Boswell Haynick along with Garbodor, and then they used Octillery as draw power. They didn't play Tapu Lele, and the reason they didn't play Tapu Lele was partly they didn't want any GXs on the field, and partly they used Shrine of Punishment, though obviously those two are connected. That's where Smeargle comes in. In a Shrine of Punishment deck, you don't want to Ultra Ball for a Tapu Lele, and in a lot of them, you're not going to be playing Tapu Lele. This is a non-GX that you can put in your deck instead of Tapu Lele. And in a lot of decks, you're not going to want to. But in decks that play Shrine of Punishment, I could see this as a one-off, as a Tapu Lele replacement. It's not going to grab you that Guzma in the mid to late game. But if you're not playing Tapu Lele, that's a moot point. But on turn 1, if you've got absolutely nothing and you're not playing Tapu Lele because you're worried about it being a GX, in comes Smeargle and hopefully copies a supporter. Yes, you've got to put it in the active. Yes, you've got to attach an energy. Yes, your opponent might not have a supporter. But are you really telling me it's not worth playing as a one-off in a deck that wants to play Tapu Lele but has decided they can't play Tapu Lele? I honestly think it is absolutely worth it. As for the second attack here, it is not something you would ever play the card for, but if you're playing it anyway, it's not terrible. 30 damage if you can flip a heads, because you need to flip a coin, and if tails, it does nothing. And look, there'll be the odd 30 HP Pokemon that you come up against, like Magikarp, for instance, that you can take out with this. If you were hitting for weakness, then you could maybe take out a Routes if you were hitting for metal weakness, or you could take out a Zorua if you were hitting for fighting weakness, but you're not. It's a colourless Pokemon. You're not hitting for weakness. It's an emergency attack, and maybe you can take out something like a Magikarp or a Feebas with this, because that's about as much as you're getting. I'm not terribly upset about that. It's not a great attack. It might be useful. It really is all about the first attack. It's not an out-and-out replacement for Tapu Lele in the majority of decks. But there are decks in which I think you should play this, and for that reason I'm going to be giving it between 3 and 4 Wassies. We do not give half Wassies, because to give half Wassies would to be barbaric. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to hear from you. Can you see this being played in some Shrine of Memories decks, or do you think there's too many problems? Let me know in the comment section. Go nuts. But remember the rule, ladies and gentlemen. Do be nice. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at the Wassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all of that, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, is to look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.